Hi, this is NextGen Picks. I didn't think this was going to be the absolute deal breaker this year. And honestly, ignoring it would have been a massive mistake for anyone dropping $2,000 on a new TV right now. I had the LG C6 and the new Samsung S90 set up right next to each other in my living room yesterday. Afternoon sun was coming in through the side window. Nothing crazy, just a normal, everyday room. And I noticed something actually pretty alarming. The marketing for both of these screens screams about infinite contrast and perfect blacks. But looking at them side by side with the TVs literally turned off, one of them wasn't black at all. Actually, wait, let me rephrase that. The ambient light in the room was physically activating the quantum dot layer on the Samsung panel. It turns the screen this weird lifted magenta color. People are agonizing over 100 nits of peak brightness on a spec sheet right now, but they're completely missing the basic physics of how these panels react to the actual environment of a real house. It's wild to me how companies just brush right past this. Before we tear into exactly why this happens and which one you should actually put in your house to avoid a huge headache, do me a quick favor. Hit the like button and subscribe NextGen Picks. It tells the algorithm that real, independent testing, bought with our own money, matters more than recycled brand press releases. Okay, let's look at what the engineering actually does here. So, let's start with the Samsung S90, because getting this thing out of the box actually gave me a mild panic attack. You see these reviewers online praising how thin the panel is, and it is. It's basically a sheet of glass glued to a millimeter of metal. But nobody talks about the sheer structural anxiety of setting it up. When I was lifting it onto the media console, the top corners literally flexed. I'm not kidding. If you're buying the 77-in or 83-in version of this, do not even think about unboxing it by yourself unless you want to snap a $3,000 piece of electronics in half before you even plug it in. But once you do get it plugged in and powered up, I have to admit the sheer brute force of the image is staggering. Samsung uses QD OLED technology. Instead of shining white light through a color filter like traditional TVs, they use pure blue OLED pixels to shoot energy into a quantum dot layer, which then violently reacts to create pure red and pure green. The physics of this means there is no white subpixel washing things out. When you push this TV into high brightness, say a bright neon sign in a dark alley in a movie, that neon sign doesn't just look bright, it looks painted on. It has a volume and a saturation to the color that older OLEDs literally cannot physically reproduce. I was playing Forza, actually. Wait, no, it was Horizon Forbidden West on the PS5, and the HDR punch on the sun hitting the red foliage was so intense, I actually squinted. For pure, unadulterated color luminance, the S90 is a monster. But here is where the spec sheet completely lies to you about what it's like to actually live with this thing. Samsung's Tizen operating system in 2026 is frankly an absolute disaster. It is a bloated, add-in-infested labyrinth. They want you to use their TV as a giant billboard for their partners. I noticed something really strange when I was just trying to calibrate the game mode. On an older TV, you press a button, a menu pops up, you tweak the gamma, you're done. On the S90, I had to back out of my HDMI input, go into a centralized gaming hub that took 3 seconds to load over Wi-Fi, dodge an auto-playing trailer for a game I don't own, and then dig through 4 submenus just to adjust the black equalizer. It is daily UI friction. It's the kind of thing that makes a premium, high-end piece of hardware feel like a cheap, subsidized budget tablet. I know there are Samsung loyalists who will defend this interface to the death, claiming you just get used to it, but I strongly disagree. Let me know in the comments if you actually tolerate this OS, or if you immediately plug an Apple TV into these things like I do, because I think it's a massive blind spot for the brand. Actually, while you're down there in the comments, let me know what specific monitor, TV, or tech category you are currently ripping your hair out trying to research, and I'll buy the top contenders for the next deep dive. Your requests literally dictate what we test next. If fighting your television just to change an input sounds like your personal nightmare, this next one is where the math actually starts to make sense for a lot of people. The LG C6. LG isn't using quantum dots here. they are still using their tried and true WLED technology, white OLED. It's a white light shining through red, green, and blue filters. Now, the spec-chasing gamers online will scream from the rooftops that WLED is dead, that the color volume is inferior to Samsung, that the peak brightness is lower, and if you are putting a light meter on a 10% white window in a pitch-black laboratory, yeah, they're right. But I don't live in a laboratory, and neither do you. Here is the hidden truth about how we actually watch television in the United States. We don't sit around watching pristine, uncompressed 100GB 4K Blu-rays all day. We watch heavily compressed YouTube TV streams of NFL games. We watch House of the Dragon on Max, where the streaming bitrate is so starved that the dark gray shadows look like blocky, pixelated Lego bricks. This is where the LG C6 completely justifies its existence. It all comes down to the Alpha 11 Gen 3 processor. I didn't expect a processor to matter this much this year. I really thought we had hit a plateau with upscaling, but sitting 8FT away on my couch, the difference is undeniable. When the S90 gets a bad signal, it almost aggressively exposes how bad the signal is. It sharpens the artifacting. The LG C6, on the other hand, acts like a forensic cleaner. It's near black quantization. The way it handles the transition from absolute zero-nit black to one-night dark gray is surgical. It smooths out the banding without destroying the film grain. If you watch a lot of standard streaming content, the C6 physically makes your bad internet look like good internet. But, and this is a massive frustrating but that almost no one is talking about in their day one honeymoon reviews, the C6 has a serious handshake problem. I noticed this on day 3. I have a Sonos Arc setup. Pretty standard for a premium living room. At least twice a week when I turn the LG C6 on, the ear connection just fails. The TV defaults back to its internal tiny speakers. You have to physically go into the LG menu, toggle the audio output off, and toggle it back on to force the handshake with the soundbar so Dolby Atmos will pass through. I dug into the AV forums, and this isn't just me. It's a widespread firmware quirk with the 2026 C series when paired with third-party soundbars. It's not a total deal-breaker, but it is exactly the kind of daily annoyance that drives people crazy when they've just spent $2,000. You expect it to just work. And that brings us to the elephant in the room, the thing that both of these manufacturers desperately want to hide from you. Aggressive Auto Brightness Limiting, or ABL. You see these stickers claiming 2,000 nits of peak brightness, but that is a complete marketing misdirection. That number only applies to a tiny 2% window on the screen, like a flashlight or a star in the night sky. What really matters is full field brightness. What happens when the entire screen is bright white, like a snowy documentary or a hockey game or a bright commercial? Both of these TVs will instantly panic. To protect the organic pixels from overheating and burning in, the TV automatically dims the entire image, and it is incredibly noticeable. You'll be watching a hockey game, and after about 60 seconds, the bright white ice suddenly looks like dirty gray slush. The Samsung S90 is slightly better at sustaining this full-screen brightness than the LG C6, but they both suffer from it. It's the inherent trade-off of owning an OLED. You are sacrificing daytime full-screen punch for perfect nighttime contrast. Let me explain that better. If you have a living room with massive uncovered south-facing windows and you watch a lot of sports on Sunday afternoons, buying either of these TVs is a mistake. I don't care what the Best Buy rep told you. The ambient light is going to fight the screen. The ABL is going to dim the image, and you are going to wonder why your expensive new OLED looks worse than your 5-year-old LED TV. In that specific scenario, you shouldn't be looking at OLED at all. You should be looking at a flagship mini-LED. But if you control your lighting, if you draw the blinds, or if your primary viewing happens after the sun goes down, that's when the real battle between these two panels actually starts. So, when the sun goes down, you're finally seeing what you paid for. But this is also where the physical engineering of these two displays starts to aggressively separate them into completely different weight classes. I was running a thermal gun over the back of the S90 the other night. Wait. Actually, it was the front of the panel right after a 3-hour HDR gaming session on my Xbox. and if you stand about 2 feet away from the screen, you can literally feel the heat radiating onto your face. It feels like a small space heater. Samsung's QD OLED tech is driving pure blue organic light incredibly hard to get those explosive reds and greens. And heat is the absolute enemy of organic light emitting diodes. Heat is what causes image retention. Heat is what causes permanent burn-in. Samsung knows this, which is why their software is constantly scanning for static logos, like a sports ticker or a video game health bar, and aggressively dimming them. But they don't include a physical aluminum heatsink on the back of the S90. They reserve that for their ultra-expensive flagship models. So you're buying a panel that runs inherently hotter without the premium cooling hardware. I'm not saying it's going to burn in after a year, but if you play FIFA or Call of Duty for 4 hours a day, every single day with that static HUD, the structural longevity of that panel is absolutely a gamble. It just is. The LG C6, by comparison, runs noticeably cooler. It's using a highly refined version of their Wall-E Evo panel. It's mature tech. They've been manufacturing variations of this exact panel for over half a decade. But that maturity comes with a massive glaring omission that I still cannot believe we are arguing about in 2026. Samsung absolutely refuses to pay the licensing fee for Dolby Vision. They just won't do it. They push their own competing HDR10 Plus format instead. Now, if you go on Reddit, you'll find 1,000 people screaming that HDR10 Plus is just as good, or that base HDR is fine because the QDO lead panel is so bright. Anyway, I want to know where you guys stand on this in the comments. Does the lack of Dolby Vision actually stop you from buying a Samsung TV? Because for me, it's infuriating. You fire up Netflix, Max, or Disney Plus, and 90% of their premium 4K library is mastered in Dolby Vision. The LG C6 reads that metadata and adjusts the contrast scene by scene perfectly. The Samsung S90 falls back to a static HDR layer. I was watching Dune Part 2. Actually, a better example is The Batman, a movie that is aggressively, almost frustratingly dark. On the LG C6, because of Dolby Vision and that Alpha 11 Gen 3 processor we talked about, the dark gray rain pulling against the black sky looks perfectly layered. On the S90, without that dynamic metadata, it occasionally crushes those dark grays right into pitch black. You literally lose detail in the shadows. But then you plug a PC into these things and the entire narrative flips. If you are a spec-chasing gamer with a high-end PC rig, the Samsung S90 natively supports 144 Hz. The motion clarity when you are spinning the camera in a shooter is just it's liquid. But here's the dirty little secret about OLED gaming that neither of these brands puts on their spec sheets. It's called VRR gamma shift. When you turn on variable refresh rate, which you absolutely should to prevent screen tearing, the voltage to the panel fluctuates based on your frame rate. If your game is lagging and the frames drop from 120 down to 70, the gamma curve on the OLED gets completely confused. The result, the darkest shadows start flickering. It looks like a rapid, subtle strobe light in the dark areas of the screen. Both of these TVs do it. It's a physical limitation of the current OLED backplane, but LG handles it better. I was digging through the LG C6 Game Optimizer dashboard, and they have this buried setting called Fine-Tune Dark Areas. You can manually dial down the black levels just enough to hide the flicker. You lose a tiny bit of shadow detail, but it stops your eyes from bleeding during a frame rate drop. Samsung's Game Bar gives you brute force black equalizers that just wash the whole image out. It's like using a sledgehammer when you need a scalpel. If all of this feels like overkill, or if you're sitting there thinking, next-gen pics, I don't game. I just want movies to look like they do in a theater without dealing with LG's weird magic remote or Samsung's awful menus. This next one is where you really need to look, but it's going to cost you. The Sony Bravia 8. Here is the most frustrating thing about the TV market right now. The Sony Bravia 8 uses the exact same physical WLED panel as the LG C6. LG Display literally manufactures the glass and sells it to Sony. Yet, if you look at Amazon US right now, the Sony usually costs about $600 to $800 more. Why? It's the Sony tax, but it's also the XR processor. I didn't want to believe the hype on this, but sitting here watching a slow panning shot in an old movie, it's undeniable. You know, when a camera pans slowly across a landscape and the image stutters, it's called jutter. To fix it, LG and Samsung use motion interpolation, which gives you that horrible soap opera effect where movies look like cheap daytime television. Sony's XR processor is the only chip on the market that can smooth out cinematic panning shots without making it look artificial. It's basically witchcraft. I was watching an old 1080p Blu-ray of The Lord of the Rings, and the way the Bravia 8 upscales the image, cleans up the film grain, and handles the motion. It makes the LG C6 look almost mechanical by comparison, but you are paying a massive premium purely for software processing and Sony's gaming. Features are notoriously a year or two behind LG. They only give you two HDMI 2.1 ports, which brings me to a massive real-world trap that so many buyers fall into. And it's not just a Sony problem. Let's look at the LG B6. It's sitting right next to the C6 at Best Buy. It's an OLED. It looks almost identical, and it's hundreds of dollars cheaper. It feels like the ultimate life hack, right? Why buy the C6 when the B6 is right there? Here's the trap. The B6, just like the Sony, only has two high-bandwidth HDMI 2.1 ports. One of those ports is also your IRCH port, the one you absolutely have to use to connect your soundbar or home theater receiver. So let's do the math. You buy the B6 to save money. You plug in your Sonos soundbar into port 3. You plug in your PlayStation 5 into port 4. Guess what? You are out of ports. If you buy an Xbox Series X next year or a high-end gaming PC, you physically cannot plug it into the TV and get 120 Hz gaming. You are artificially bottlenecked by the processor LG put in their budget model. The C6 and the Samsung S90 give you 4 full bandwidth ports. I cannot stress enough how important this is for long-term ownership. You keep a TV for 5, maybe 7 years. Do not bottleneck your living room over a $300 difference today. Honestly, I don't know why we accept this. It's the kind of planned obsolescence that forces you to upgrade 3 years earlier than you want it to. And that's really the theme here. Every single one of these TVs has a hidden trade-off that only reveals itself after the 30-day return window closes. With the LG C6, you are fighting the magic remote. I hate this thing. The cursor drifts. You set the remote down on the couch. It is daily UI friction. With the Samsung S90, you are fighting the panel polarization. I had a buddy buy an S90 and he called me furious because he thought his screen was defective. He said his blacks looked gray. I asked him if he had a lamp turned on behind his couch. He did. The ambient light from a single floor lamp was hitting the QD OLED screen and washing out the black levels. These aren't things you can fix in a firmware update. These are the physical realities of the engineering. So, where does this actually leave you when you are standing at the register, credit card in hand, sweating over whether you're making a $2,000 mistake? Because here is the brutal reality of the 2026 TV market. There is no such thing as the perfect TV. Anyone on YouTube telling you to blindly buy the C6 or the S90 without asking what your actual house looks like is doing you a massive disservice. You aren't buying a spec sheet. You are buying a piece of furniture that relies entirely on the physics of the room you put it in. Actually, let me back up. Let's eliminate a massive chunk of you right now to save you from a very expensive return process. If your living room looks like this, if you have uncovered south-facing windows, if you watch college football at noon on a Saturday with the blinds wide open, do not buy the LG C6, the infinite contrast marketing. They put the TV in a sunroom and then they spend the next 5 years squinting through glare, complaining that the TV is too dim. The ambient light physically overpowers the panel. The S90's lack of a polarizer means your blacks will literally turn magenta. The C6 will aggressively trigger its auto brightness limiter and dim the grass on the football field until it looks like gray concrete. If that is your room, you need to abandon OLED completely. You need a flagship mini-LED. You need the brute force retina searing brightness of a Sony Bravia 9 or a Samsung QN90. You need a TV that can fight the sun and win. Yes, you might get a tiny bit of blooming around subtitles in pitch black rooms, but you won't be using it in a pitch black room. Stop forcing OLED into environments it wasn't engineered for. But if you are the person who primarily games, if your TV is basically just a massive, glorious PC monitor that occasionally plays movies, if you have an Xbox Series X, a PS5, or a rig with an RTX card, and you care about raw, unadulterated color volume at high frame rates, the Samsung S90 is the undisputed king of your specific category. When you push a 144 Hz signal into this QDO LED panel, the motion clarity is so liquid it almost feels unnatural the first time you see it. And because the quantum dot layer doesn't rely on a white subpixel to boost brightness, the reds and greens in your games don't wash out when the scene gets intensely bright. They stay saturated. A muzzle flash in Cyberpunk or an explosion in Helldivers physically illuminates your room with pure saturated color, but you are accepting a trade-off. You are accepting the UI lag of Tizen. You are accepting the lack of Dolby Vision for your movie nights, and you are accepting that if you leave a static HUD on the screen for 6 hours a day, the thermal stress on that blue OLED layer is significantly higher than on the LG. You are buying a sports car without a heavy-duty radiator. It runs hot. It looks incredible, but you have to baby it just a little bit. Which brings us to the exact opposite buyer, the cinema purist, the binge watcher, the person who wants to turn on Apple TV, press play on a 4K Dolby Vision stream, and just have the TV handle the math without you ever having to touch a settings menu. For you. The LG C6 is the absolute undisputed best overall television of 2026. I know it sounds like I'm hedging, but I'm really not. The C6 is the Swiss Army knife of the OLED market. It doesn't have the explosive color volume of the Samsung. No, if you put them side by side in a laboratory, the Samsung wins the color gamut test. But sitting on my couch, watching a highly compressed low bitrate episode of The Last of Us on Max, the LG C6 destroys the S90. The Alpha 11 Gen 3 processor's ability to clean up banding in dark scenes is basically witchcraft at this point. And Dolby Vision, I didn't realize how much I relied on dynamic metadata until I didn't have it on the Samsung. The C6 maps the highlights frame by frame. It ensures you never lose shadow detail in a dark thriller, and it prevents clouds from blowing out in bright outdoor scenes. It is mature, highly reliable engineering. Yes, the magic remote is annoying. Yes, the EER handshake issue with Sonos bars is a frustrating quirk that LG needs to patch. But in terms of day-to-day visual reliability, the C6 is the safest bet in the industry. Now we have to talk about the best value. And this is where I'm going to make the manufacturers a little bit angry because the math they want you to do is completely wrong. They want you to look at the LG B6. They position it as the entry-level OLED. It's usually about $300 to $400 cheaper than the C6. And on the surface, the B6 looks like a steal. But remember what we talked about earlier. The B6 neuters your physical inputs. You only get 2 HDMI 2.1 ports, and one is held hostage by your soundbar. You are buying a TV that is fundamentally bottlenecked for the future of gaming and home theater expansion. So, don't buy the B6. In fact, if you are strictly on a budget and you cannot afford the C6, my official recommendation is to literally walk away from the 2026 wall at Best Buy. Go online and hunt down clearance stock of last year's LG C5. I'm completely serious. The dirty little secret of the television industry is that year-over-year OLED upgrades are incredibly incremental. The C5 has 4 full bandwidth HDMI 2.1 ports. It has 95% of the brightness of the C6. The processor is slightly older, yes, but it still has Dolby Vision. And because retailers are desperate to clear warehouse space for the 2026 models, you can routinely find the C5 for hundreds of dollars less than the new B6. You are getting a vastly superior physical chassis and port selection for less money. That is the actual value play in this market. Hi, it's NextGen Picks again. We've already talked about the physics, the thermals, the processor shortcuts, and the UI headaches. But I want to leave you with one final reality check about buying a TV right now. It's called the showroom illusion. When you walk into a big box store, every TV is cranked to vivid mode. The color temperature is pushed way too blue to make whites look brighter. Saturation is maxed out to 100%, and they're looping specially designed demo clips, slow-motion honey dripping, fireworks bursting against a perfect black sky. They do this for a reason, because they know if they showed you normal compressed cable content, like a basic news broadcast, you'd struggle to see any real difference between a $2,000 OLED and a $400 budget set sitting a few aisles away. So don't make your decision based on how a TV looks under harsh fluorescent store lighting. Buy a TV based on what you actually watch in the room you actually live in. If you are fighting the sun, buy mini-LED. If you are a hardcore PC gamer chasing perfect color volume, buy the Samsung S90 and just buy an Apple TV to bypass the terrible OS. But if you're like most people, if you watch Netflix in the dark, if you value reliable software, perfect shadow detail, and Dolby Vision, the LG C6 is the most well-rounded display you can put in your house. I've put links in the description below to the exact models we talked about today. I don't link to the compromised versions or the weird retailer-specific SKUs that strip features. Those are the vetted sources, the safe paths to making sure you actually get the panel we tested here today. Let me know in the comments if you think the lack of Dolby Vision is a deal breaker for Samsung or if I'm just being a purist. I'll be down there arguing with you guys for the first few hours. Thanks for supporting independent testing, and I'll see you in the next